Hello everyone. A viewer on this channel, a subscriber on this channel, asked me a very simple question. How did I become a Beatles fan? And I was going to do a video on this a long time ago and I never got around to it. And I figured I'd do it now. And I'm just going to talk, is what I'm going to do. How did I become a Beatles fan? Well, if we're going to do that, we got to go all the way back to the mid-70s when I was a toddler. First off, if the truth be told, the first music I remember listening to and being obsessed with is the Four Seasons. Frankie Valli, Bob Gaudio, Tom DeVito, and Nick Massey, and later Joe Long. The first song I remember being obsessed with is Ragdoll. The very first words, according to my parents, that I ever said was Radda, Radda. And I remember, there's a lot of things I remember from when I was like the ages of 3 and 4 and 5 and possibly 2, but I was just so little that everything seems to jumble together. You don't know what year it was, you don't know what day it was, but you remember it. I remember always wanting to hear boom, 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 psh, boom, 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 psh. To talk about the Beatles, I remember always going to family gatherings in Schaumburg, Illinois at my Aunt and Nan's house. And two people I have to thank for my love of the Beatles. My father, of course, and my late godfather, Richard. In fact, he's somebody I wish was there for me as I got older. He's the closest thing to a brother that my mother had. He passed away when he was 21. I believe it was 21. The bottom line, he was very young. He unfortunately had heart issues. But he is somebody that I think about to this day. Because he had this love of the Beatles, and his love of the Beatles came into me. In fact, I wouldn't be a bit surprised if his love of the Beatles came into me. But I remember going to Schaumburg and seeing his records as this little toddler. And the one distinct moment I remember is during one of these gatherings in his bedroom, on his turntable, he was playing the American album, the Beatles' second album, which to me I think is the best U.S. album. And he had the Apple reprint. If anybody remembers when the Beatles started Apple, a lot of the U.S. albums started to carry the Apple label. And it was the first time I heard I'll Get You. And I was intrigued by the way John was going, I'll never, 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 ever. Just that never, 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 ever got me hooked. But I always remember hearing She Loves You every time I was over. She loves you, yeah, yeah, yeah. And that's, in fact, what I thought the song was called. She loves you, yeah, yeah, yeah. I remember getting up on a little stool and looking at Side 2 of the Beatles' second album, spinning around on the turntable, the sliced apple side. And in this toddler's brain, somehow the song She Loves You synced up with the sliced apple somehow. I don't know how. I can't really explain it. But I remember this parallel happening with She Loves You and the sliced apple spinning around the turntable. From that point on, I wanted to hear She Loves You, yeah, yeah, yeah. Now, I know my mother's going to be watching this, so she probably doesn't remember. If there's any Gen Xers on my channel who watch my channel or are watching this video from Chicago, anybody born in the late 60s and early 70s, I was born 73, there was a station in Chicago called WFYR. This is going back, guys. And WFYR played hits from today, from what I remember, as well as 60s. I believe it was WFYR that they did this to, but I remember going on a drive with my mom and dad on a Saturday. And my dad had an 8-track tape player, but, believe it or not, he didn't own any Beatles on 8-track tape. And I kept saying, play She Loves You, yeah, yeah, yeah. And I remember they would turn on the station. And I don't know if my mom was calling the radio station and always requesting the song, and my parents knew to go to that station at a specific time. But I remember that they would turn on the radio, and within a couple of songs, She Loves You would come on. Oh, I was in heaven. Now, my mom had Beach Boy records. Every time I would spend the night with my grandparents on my mom's side, it was with my little Winnie the Pooh record player. It was Diana Ross and the Supremes, the Beach Boys, and Herb Alpert. Whenever it was spending the weekend with with the grandparents on my dad's side, when I was at that age, it was Herb Alpert and the Beatles, and my grandfather's old 78 records. I first heard Yesterday and Today, the American album. My dad had it. That was the first time I realized Paul McCartney, the guy who was singing silly love songs on the radio, was a member of the Beatles. My father even wrote the names on the album cover with an arrow pointing to who was who. That's how I learned John, Paul, George, and Ringo. And I honestly thought the Beatles, John, George, and Ringo didn't know that the lead singer of Wings was in the band with them. But I learned every single song off of Yesterday and Today. I remember my Papa Al, my grandfather on my dad's side, recording me with a little tin can I had that I was drumming on, singing all the songs. I learned every single song. I knew And Your Bird Can Sing. I knew I'm Only Sleeping. I knew Drive My Car. I knew Yesterday. Don't ask me how, and I'm not just saying this. I learned those songs. That's how I got into music and thought I was going to be a rock star when I grew up. Little did I know. But I learned those songs, and the first Beatles album I ever physically owned, I got for Christmas in either 75 or 76. I don't know when, but one of those years I got Let It Be, the Red Apple. Red Apple. Very first time I heard those songs, and I played it constantly. Constantly. I had a Beatles album in my collection. Now the next phase on how I became a fan and became obsessed, even at that early age. This may have been around the time my mom was pregnant with my sister, which would have been December of 76. And I think it may have been around that time. Because I remember we lived in a 2-flat in the Logan Square neighborhood of Chicago. We lived on Sawyer Avenue, and it was a 2-flat. We lived on the upper half, and our neighbors, they lived on the obviously lower part. Doe, Jim, and Judy, and Danny McCoy, the McCoy family. And Doe was going to watch me in the morning. So my father brought me down there, I believe in my pajamas still. And she had me sit in Judy's room, her daughter. Judy had a lot of records. And I remember clearly a lot. This is the 70s now, so a lot of Bay City Rollers and a lot of Partridge Family. I clearly remember that at the time. But she had the Endless Summer compilation by the Beach Boys, and she had both the Red and Blue album, 1962 to 1966 and 1967 to 1970. So Doe had put on the Blue album for me on side 2, which begins with I Am the Walrus. Now, if this was December of 76, I would have been about 3 years old. 3 going on 4 in 77. And Hearing I Am the Walrus as a 3-year-old both frightened me and fascinated me. Something about the sound, the strings, I was sort of obsessed with the thing. And several months later, I asked my dad to get me a Beatles record, and he said, sure. So we went to a record store. I forgot which record store it was in Chicago, but on 8-track, I remember he bought himself the best of Neil Sedaka, who had just seen a resurgence at the time. So I heard Laughter in the Rain, but this was the first time I heard Breaking Up Is Hard to Do on the way home from the record store. And we went to the Beatles section, and he was thumbing through the records, and once 1967 and 1970 came up, the Blue Album, I said, that one, because I knew it had I Am the Walrus on it. But this was the first time I played that album incessantly. That was the first time I heard Strawberry Fields, Penny Lane. I was shocked that Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds was not an Elton John song. And I played that so much and carried it everywhere that the record got very scratched. And the cover got worn very fast. And my obsession kept on growing. I had my tonsils taken out, I believe in 1978. And my Aunt Helen asked me if I wanted any records. And I said I wanted the Beatles album that had a finger pointing on it. The Yellow Submarine album, I didn't know it was called that. And that was the one I said. She got me the Yellow Submarine album and the Wings album, London Town. Oh my gosh. A year later, my godfather had passed. And I remember my Aunt Nan telling me that Richard had said I could have any Beatles album I wanted. I chose the American Beatles 65, Beatles at Hollywood Bowl, which he had, and Wings Over America. Judging by his record collection, his favorite solo Beatles music was obviously Paul McCartney. And my dad bought the rock and roll music compilation on 8-track. First time I heard Helter Skelter, that blew me away. I got my tonsils taken out in my adenoids taken out in 1980. My Aunt Helen asked me again, do you want me to get you some records? I said, Magical Mystery Tour, and there's a Beatles album that shows them standing in leaves. The U.S. album for that was the early Beatles. So she got me Magical Mystery Tour and the early Beatles, orange capital labels. I obsessively played those. Now, I didn't know too much about the history of the Beatles. My mom finally told me in 1980 that the Beatles broke up. So I thought they finally broke up after all this time. I didn't realize they broke up in 1970. In 1981, maybe people remember here, there was a radio show, and it aired on WFMT radio in Chicago, called The Beatles, The Days in Their Lives. It was a 2-day event. There was a narrator, I forgot who narrated it. This is where I first heard the British albums, with commentary before each track and Beatles interviews before each track. But this is where I first heard the history of a lot of the songs, and I listened intently to this show over the 2 days. This was the first time I heard all of the UK Revolver tracks. And this was the first time I heard Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, from beginning to end. Again, interrupted with commentary and interviews about what each song was about and about the making of the album. That was the first time I heard how they came up with the sound effects at the end of Being for the Benefit of Mr. Kite. The next day I heard the White Album and Abbey Road from beginning to end. The same thing, as well as the singles and some of the Apple singles as well. That put me over the edge. My communion in 1981, the one gift I wanted more than anything else. Who gets records for their communion? I wanted Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. And I got it. Purple capital label with the cutouts. The cutouts were actually cut out by me, which I should have never done. That Christmas, I got the White Album, Purple Capital label, but mine came without the poster. Easter of 1982, I got Abbey Road, Purple Capital label. I read Nicholas Schaffner's book when I was 12 years old. It was sort of an edited version of the Beatles Forever. It was called The Boys from Liverpool. It was designed more for younger kids. That's why he cut out all the four-letter words and everything in the book. And it was much more of a straight narrative. But I obsessively read that. I saw the documentary, The Complete Beatles. My collection grew. The Beatles at that time became this massive obsession. And I remember in 5th grade when I told people at my school that I liked the Beatles, people had laughed at me. I didn't realize how many Beatle fans my age were out there. But I got laughed at, you know. Yes, I was into some of the stuff at the time, but the Beatles were king for me. The Beatles were now at that level. Everything in my life was the Beatles. I couldn't wait for Christmas of '85 to get the Give My Regards to Broad Street soundtrack. Yeah, I did. 1987, when they first came out on CD, I didn't have a CD player, and the 20 years ago today of Sgt. Pepper and the Summer of Love, everything about my life was Beatles that year. I had met some Beatle fans, people who were closeted Beatle fans at my school, and that was the first year I went to, at the time, what was called Beatle Fest. It is now called the Fest for Beatle Fans, or simply the Fest. But at the time, it was Beatle Fest. Mark and Carol Lapito's Beatle Fest at the Hyatt Regency O'Hare in Chicago. The gym I belonged to, I was at the time I was 14 years old. The gym me and my dad had worked out at, one of the ladies who worked out at that gym, she would cover the Beatle Fest auction for Beatles Fan magazine. So I was able to get tickets. One day, I didn't even spend the whole day there. And that's where I saw Liverpool for the first time. Everywhere there was all this 20 years ago today stuff going on, and it was so exciting. The Beatles catalog released on CD. I didn't have a CD player at the time, but it was still exciting. Everybody who owned a CD player, I was excited for them. And I couldn't wait to go back next year. I said, I'm going to go to Beatle Fest in summer of 1988 when I graduated from 8th grade. And I spent the whole day there. And one of the things I realized is that there were a lot of people of my age at Beatle Fest. That kept my interests going. Every year my summers were based around Beatle Fest. My senior year, my parents got me the ultimate gift. They got me a room at the Hyatt Regency O'Hare. At that time, it was only Saturday and Sunday. It was only in summer of '95 that they made it a Friday night, all-day Saturday, all-day Sunday event. But I remember staying over on Saturday night. One of my good friends, my sister from another mister, Shannon, who I know is going to be watching this video, hung out with me at the fest. It was a great time. Bought a lot of stuff with my graduation money. And that was essentially every single year. When the anthology came out, it just became this massive obsession of mine. And it started with my father. After John Lennon passed, he let me hear the U.S. Rubber Soul album and the U.S. Help album, as well as he bought me, finally, the Red album, 1962 to 1966. And I was playing those records religiously, along with everything else I was listening to. But something about those records, I never knew eventually I knew that they were made in the 1960s, but they didn't sound like that to me. Even going back to the early Beatle music didn't sound like it was in this time zone, the specific time period. And occasionally I would play, let's say, I want to hold your hand, as if I was an American in 1964 hearing this for the first time and how it flipped everybody out. And that further fueled my obsession. This stuff was new then. Nobody heard this stuff. And now, it sounds new and fresh today. The bottom line, my obsession is the music. The personalities and the things that they did are secondary. But even that is my obsession. The Beatles, to me, never seemed like they were untouchable. All four of the Beatles seemed like four guys that I could walk up to and shake their hand and say, hey, how's it going? Hey, man, that was a great song you wrote. I love that. Boy, this weather totally sucks. I can have a normal conversation with. That's what they seem like to me. Four kids that didn't know they were going to change history or make history. That wasn't their intention. That's another thing that gets me about them. These were just four regular guys. Four regular friends that wanted to play rock and roll and get out of having a regular job. Like we all wanted to do. That's the other thing that I get obsessed with. I'm glad my father was able to help share in my obsession. He had gone to a couple of Beatles fests with me and he wanted to see the Battle of the Bands. And we would always enjoy the Battle of the Bands together. If there's one thing I wish, as I said, I wish my godfather Richard could have shared in my obsession, because I know he and I would have been nerding out. I know that he and I would have been obsessively watching the anthology together. I can imagine he and I going to the fest together all those years. I could imagine he and I talking about Sgt. Pepper even today. Still talking about it. But if it wasn't for my godfather Richard and my father, this love of mine, this thing that I'm obsessed with, as much as people are obsessed with Star Trek or going to Comic-Con, which I love all that as well, but this is that for me. This obsession with the Beatles has formed the way I think, the way I feel, and the way I try and live my life. I hope you enjoyed this.